ranking Warrior Cats from best to worst. Here we go. Number 1, The Prophecies Begin. I know in our current day and age, it's a bit cliche to say the originals were better. But if they weren't good, then we wouldn't have a fandom. We wouldn't be talking about cat books almost after 20 years. And there's good reason for that. Compared to later arcs of Warrior Cats, the Series 1 is relatively smaller scale, as well as not requiring any prior knowledge unlike later series. The character of Rusty, later known as Firestar, is also a particularly good protagonist to start our series with. As, like the readers, he is new to this world, so when he learns something, we learn something, and it's done in a very naturalistic way. Overall, I don't really have anything else to say. It's the first series, it's good, let's move on. Number 2, Dawn of the Clans. An often forgotten about arc due to the fact it came out after Omen of the Stars, or a point in time in which many Warrior Cats fans stopped reading the books consistently. In recent years, many fans have rediscovered this lost gem of a series. As far as prequels go, it ranks rather highly. The idea of an arc exploring the origin of the clans could have gone rather poorly. And while the first 3 books do an excellent job of explaining how the cats got there, their early struggles, and their earliest conflicts, the latter half of the arc is not great. Book 4 of the series could just straight out be erased, and nothing would value be lost other than One Eye, who is forgettable at best, and Starflower, who is underutilized. Book 5, for the most part, is also kind of useless, but there is some interesting drama between Clear Sky and his mother, so it can stay. As for book 6, it's an alright ending to an arc. I mean, it could be better, don't get me wrong, but as far as endings go, it's passable. It also has some firsts for the series, including our first protagonist's death with Greywing, whose death is kind of overdramatic and honestly a bit overblown, but still significant. And in regards to Greywing naming the clans, I have mixed feelings about this. I mean, it could have been better, like a lot of the clans, but at the same time, I don't know how else they could have done it that wouldn't have been as hand-holdy. But even after all that, I still hold Dawn of the Clans as my personal favorite in the Warrior Cat series. But I do have to say, objectively, The Prophecies Begins is better. Number 3, The New Prophecy. Oh boy, I'm gonna get some flack for this, aren't I? So The New Prophecy isn't a perfect arc. Far from it. The protagonists are whack, the plot is just all over the place. But I still think it's better than some other arcs, which is a bit controversial, so let me explain. The New Prophecy is what I would call an average Warrior Cats arc. It is the bare minimum of both good, but also bad. In terms of our protagonists, there which being 4, technically 5, but does Feathertail really count? Both of our male protagonists, Brambleclaw and Stormfur, aren't great. Stormfur is kind of boring in his one appearance in the arc, which is kind of where they even decided to do that. As for Brambleclaw, book 1 is fine. Him in Midnight is fine. He's not great, he's not perfect, but he's fine. They're trying to essentially make an antithesis to Firestar, where like he's similar and then he's kind of naive, but he's supposed to like go on a similar hero's journey where he learns to be better. And book 4 definitely justifies this, as it does show him take more of a prominent role. Many people start looking up to him, and he does seem a lot more confident. And then book 6 happens, and he just acts like he did in book 1. Like, all that character development just ebbs away, and it's kind of confusing, but also a little impressive considering how much backtracking they did just so they could justify him fighting Hawkfrost, which you could have done without this backtracking of his character, but And then there's Squirrelpaw / Squirrel Flight. Book 3 Squirrelpaw is kind of annoying, which, given how she acted in book 1 and 2, is not really that surprising, but having her as a protagonist is not great. Like, admittedly, any other person could have been protagonist for book 3, and it would have been better. Like, she does kind of evolve over the course of the series, but we don't really get to see a lot of that until book 5. Wherein she does act a lot more mature and, well, like a real character that isn't annoying. She probably has some of the most blatant evolution of a character between books. And considering that a whole other book took place in between where she kind of acted like a kid, then also kind of acted a bit more mature. It does feel a bit rushed, but at the same time, it makes sense if they wanted to have multiple protagonists and have different perspectives, so it's passable. And then there's Leafpool. Leafpool, or at the beginning of the arc, Leafpaw, is our only protagonist in all 6 books, being our first ever Medicine Cat protagonist. Now, true, in some books, most notably Book 2, and you could argue Book 3, she is kind of pointless. Like, her only main goal in the first 3 books is to act as a camera into ThunderClan while the traveling cats are away to the Sundrown Place. Essentially, to keep us caught up with the going-ons in the forest territories. This is fine. It makes sense why they would do this to not completely keep us in the dark of what happened. But you could also make the argument that it would have been more jarring and more emotionally impactful if we had no idea what happened and saw all the horrifying things that happened in their absence. Either way is fine. But then we get to the latter half of the arc, in which the Leafpool and Crowfeather love story begins, and people have mixed feelings about this. Personally, I'm fine with it. In terms of, like, forbidden romance, which is a staple of Warrior Cats, it's among one of the better ones because, yeah, it's sad and kind of annoying that it doesn't happen, but at the same time, the reasons are a bit more justified. To people who make arguments why it's dumb and honestly kind of pointless, I agree with you, but considering we only get the romance in 1, technically 2 books if you really stretch it, it does kind of seem sudden, random, blinking and miss it, just kind of there. But the new prophecy in particular started a trend that many Warrior Cat series would follow. For instance, it started the multiple protagonist trend. Whereas the first series only had 1 protagonist, this had 2, 1 fixed and 1 rotating. Now, 1 protagonist has been a favorite amongst fans, and personally, including some arcs that I don't particularly like, I admit the books that only have 1 protagonist are among my favorite. However, 2 protagonists can work, and in some cases they do make it work, particularly in Book 5, where we have 1 protagonist be Leafpool and 1 protagonist be Squirrelflight. Considering they're sisters, it makes a good narrative to see them have a conversation, and then see one side of it, and then see the other side of it. But at the end of the day, the plot isn't good, and these characters just can't save it. Ignoring the obvious tribe problem, this series has one of the most overt splits between the first 3 books and the second 3 books. Granted, it's not as bad as Power of 3, but it's still noticeable. But enough talking about the new prophecy. Let's move on to number 4, The Broken Code. Gonna be honest, I haven't finished the series yet. But in terms of what it has, I think it'll probably end up being here, because overall, I think it's pretty good. Granted, not as good as the new prophecy comparatively, but I might have to do a rereading of the prophecy to compare. But for now, this is my current ranking. All I can currently say for now is that, by Warrior Cat standards, this is the most ambitious arc they've done, and while they have followed through on some of the things they've promised, not all of them. So, it remains here. Next, number 5, Omen of the Stars. It's not really that good, gonna be honest. Honestly, both it and the Power of 3, the previous arc, kind of are similar in ranking, but I think Omen of the Stars just edges it out, but just a little bit. It's mainly saved by its protagonist, much like Power of 3, but wherein Power 3 only has 1 good protagonist, being Jayfeather, this one has 2, being Jayfeather and Ivypool. Jayfeather, of course, is Jayfeather, so there's that. Ivypool itself is interesting because she's our first antagonistic protagonist. She does start out on the antagonistic side, being the Dark Forest, and while she isn't straight up a villain like Clear Sky would eventually be, she is definitely against our heroes until she does eventually see the error of her ways and works to better herself through all. Honestly, it's a pretty good redemption story. Dovewing is just kind of there. Like, she's not bad, but they never give her anything interesting to do, which is sad because she has honestly the most conceptually interesting power out of the 3. She definitely gets more interesting development when she's not a protagonist, but I just wish she had more to do. And Lion Blaze is just bad. I don't have any good reason, he's just not good. Speaking of Lion Blaze, this is actually a good segue into number 6, Power of Three. Power of Three has no idea what it's doing. I'm gonna be real here. The first 3 books are really pointless. Nothing really interesting happens other than the misadventures of 3 ThunderClan apprentices. Lion Blaze and Hollyleaf don't even find out about the prophecy until book 4. Speaking of Lion Blaze and Hollyleaf, they're not good protagonists. I've already stated I don't like Lion Blaze, because I don't. Again, no real reason here. But Hollyleaf, like Dovewing, is interesting, but they never give her anything to do, so she's just kind of there. Even when they finally give her, things to do in book 6, it kind of comes out of nowhere, and it kind of seems like the thing that Lion Blaze would do, but it's even more disappointing when you figure out that the only reason Hollyleaf isn't a part of the 3 is because they couldn't figure out a good power to give her. And then there's Soul. I kind of like Soul. But I understand that he is weird, and at the end of the day, he shouldn't have been allowed to live. Pretty much the only reason I think he does live is because they wanted to bring him back. If they truly wanted to cement Hollyleaf kind of going off the deep end, they should have just let her kill Soul. With all that said, let's move on to the 7th and worst Warrior Cats arc, A Vision of Shadows. Right, so, I don't like A Vision of Shadows. I really don't like it. I dare say I hate it, even. Reason being, it is the most baffling, nonsensical Warrior Cats media I have ever read. First, let's talk about the protagonists. Alderheart, being a protagonist of the overall series, is only really a protagonist in the first book. For one, he's a solo protagonist, which allows us to fully understand his character. Note that most of his struggles with being a medicine cat and being a warrior are never fully brought up again in the later books. Alderheart's only purpose is to introduce the quote-unquote real protagonists of this arc, that of which being Twig Branch and Violet Shine. Barring the fact that they're honestly really boring, they essentially replace Alderheart as a protagonist for this arc, with him getting completely shafted. Case in point, his relationship with Needletail, whereas he gets replaced essentially with Violet Shine. Speaking of Needletail, it feels that Needletail should have lived a lot longer. In fact, it also feels that Darktail should have lived a lot longer, because the latter half of Vision of Shadows goes nowhere. Yes, Guy Clan reintegrated into clan life, Shadow Clan losing their faith again, and Juniper Claw going kind of crazy happens, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. The story just feels really stretched out, and it doesn't feel like they had an idea how to finish it off, which is even weirder when you consider the super editions released during this time. Hawkwing's Journey and Tigerheart's Shadow were the 2 super editions released during this arc, and they're kind of fascinating because for the first time in super edition history, they are required reading. Hawkwing in the main series doesn't appear until book 3, and Hawkwing's Journey was actually released before book 3, release date wise. So our first ever appearance and meeting of Hawkwing in his own super edition, which is kind of weird. Plus, a lot of what the book contains is important to the overall plot. It explains more about Darktail, how he found SkyClan, how he overthrew them. It explains why so few SkyClan clans are still alive in book 3. It even subtly, though not directly, gives us an answer of who Twig Branch and Violet Shine's father is. Now, the book in and of itself is actually kind of good. So it's kind of weird. Like, yes, we want it to be in probably the main story, but at the same time, by itself, it works. And then we have Tigerheart's Shadow, which is kind of bad. The point of Tigerheart's Shadow is to explain where Tigerheart went after Shadow Clan blew up again. Now, first off, I just want to say this is probably the only instance I've ever read where the Tigerheart and Dovewing relationship works. And when I say works, know that there's big air quotes there, because So the book is overall bad, but a different kind of bad, as it's also hilarious, so we'll call it hilariously bad. Aside from the fact that Tigerheart is kind of an idiot for most of the book, who can forget such classic lines as dragging a corpse to go receive 9 lives? In conclusion, I don't like A Vision of Shadows. I really don't like A Vision of Shadows. I know some people do. People really like it. I don't. I think it's among the worst in the series, and it was part of the reason I stopped reading Warrior Cats consistently. But what about A Starless Clan, the current arc that is ongoing? Well, as I said, it's ongoing. Currently 3 books are out, with a 4th coming later this year. And because of that, there's no real way to give a definitive ranking until, all books are out. But based on my current educated guess, I'd have to say it'll probably be better or worse than A New Prophecy. But at this point, there's no real definitive way to tell. And that's it. That's my ranking of the main Warrior Cat series. I hope you enjoyed. Tell me what your opinions are. Alright, bye. Have a nice day.